"You'll never see a dime of that money, sweetheart. My husband worked his whole life for it, and I'll make sure it goes exactly where I decide." That's what she said to me, right there in the hospital hallway, while my father-in-law was still warm in that bed. I stood there, looking at her face, and I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not tears, just a cold, quiet certainty that this woman had just made the biggest mistake of her life. My name is Emily. I'm 29 years old, and I've been married to Marcus for 4 years. From the very beginning, I knew his mother was a complicated woman. She had this way of smiling at you while saying something that could cut you open if you weren't paying attention. The kind of woman who would compliment your dress and then add, just quietly enough that only you could hear, that it was a shame you didn't have the figure to really do it justice. I learned early on to stay calm around her, to smile back, to not give her the reaction she was fishing for. Marcus loved her. She was his mother. And I loved Marcus. So I tried. I really did try. His father, Raymond, was different. He was a quiet, steady man who had spent 40 years building something real. He owned 2 commercial properties in the city, had savings he never talked about but that everyone knew were substantial, and had a collection of things he'd gathered over a lifetime that meant more to him than their price tags. He liked me. I could tell because he'd ask me questions and actually listen to the answers. He remembered things I told him. He called me by my name without hesitating. With his wife, my mother-in-law Gloria, you always felt like you were a minor character in a story that was entirely about her. Raymond got sick in the fall. It came fast, the way it sometimes does with men who never complained about anything, who just kept going until suddenly they couldn't. By December, we were spending more time at the hospital than anywhere else. Marcus was devastated. He and his father had a relationship built on few words and a lot of respect, and watching that slip away was breaking him quietly from the inside. I was there every day, sitting with him, holding his hand in the waiting room, bringing him food he barely touched. Gloria was there too, of course, but something about the way she moved through that hospital started to feel different to me. There was an energy to her that didn't match grief. She was making calls in the parking lot that she'd stop when anyone got close. She was asking the nurses questions about paperwork and timelines that seemed strange for a wife who was supposed to be focused only on her husband's comfort. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being uncharitable, that grief looks different in different people, that maybe she was just trying to stay organized during a chaotic time. Raymond passed in January. The funeral was quiet, the way he would have wanted. Afterward, we went back to the family home, the house where Marcus had grown up, and people sat around eating food they'd brought and talking in low voices. I stayed close to Marcus, kept his glass filled, made sure he ate something. Gloria sat at the head of the table like she always had, receiving condolences with a kind of practiced dignity that I had always admired even when I didn't like her. It was 3 days later that she said those words to me in the hospital hallway. We'd gone back to collect some of Raymond's personal items that had been left behind, and I made the mistake of mentioning gently that Marcus had talked to me about wanting to go through his father's things together as a family to make sure everything was handled properly. That was when she turned to me with that smile, the one that never reached her eyes, and she told me that I would never see a dime. If you're new here and you found this story, do me a favor right now. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. I share everything here, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this one ends. I went home and I didn't say anything to Marcus that night. I sat with it. I thought about what she had said, about the way she had said it, about all the small things I had noticed over the past weeks that had never quite added up, and then I thought about the coffre. That's what Raymond had always called it, half joking, because the word had come up in some old movie he liked. But it wasn't a joke. It was a real safe, a good one, bolted to the floor of the study in that house, behind the bookshelf that swung open on a hinge he'd installed himself. I had only seen it twice. Marcus had mentioned once, casually, that his father kept important documents and some cash in there, that he had always been a little old-fashioned about banks, preferred to have something he could put his hands on. What Gloria did not know, and what I only knew because Raymond had told me himself during one of those quiet afternoons when Marcus had stepped out and it was just the two of us, was that he had installed a small camera inside the study. He had done it after a contractor had come to do some work on the house, and he'd noticed that a few things seemed moved afterward. He was not a paranoid man, but he was a careful one. The camera was positioned to cover the bookshelf and the safe. He had mentioned it to me the way he mentioned most things, without drama, just as a fact. He said Marcus knew about it, but that he'd never told Gloria because she would have taken it as an insult, and he didn't want the argument. I sat in my kitchen that night, and I thought about that camera for a long time. The next morning, I called Raymond's lawyer. His name was Gerald Hatch, and he had handled Raymond's affairs for over 20 years. I had met him twice at family events, and he had always struck me as the kind of man who did not waste words. I introduced myself, reminded him who I was, and told him that I had some concerns about the estate. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in that careful way lawyers have, that he was glad I had called because he had some concerns of his own. We met 3 days later, Marcus and I together, at Gerald's office downtown. It was a clean, serious room with bookshelves and natural light, and Gerald sat across from us with a folder on the desk in front of him, and the expression of a man who had seen a great deal and was no longer surprised by most of it. He told us that Raymond had updated his will 14 months before his death, that the updated will left the 2 commercial properties jointly to Marcus and to a charitable foundation Raymond had quietly set up for underprivileged youth in the neighborhood where he'd grown up, that there was a sum of money designated for Marcus specifically, held in an account that Gloria had no access to, and a separate personal letter for Marcus sealed and set aside for this meeting. And then Gerald said that there was a problem. He told us that in the 2 weeks between Raymond's death and the reading of the will, someone had accessed the safe in the study, that several items were missing, including a significant amount of cash that Raymond had documented in a personal ledger he kept, and a set of bearer bonds that had been held there for years, that the access had been logged because the safe had a digital lock with a record function, and the log showed it had been opened twice in that period at times when Marcus had not been in the house. And then Gerald opened his laptop and turned it toward us. The camera footage was not high resolution. It was the kind of image that older security systems produce, a little grainy, a little flat, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to see the bookshelf being moved. Clear enough to see the safe being opened. Clear enough to see the hands reaching in and removing things, and then the face that looked up toward the camera for just a moment, not knowing it was there, or forgetting, or simply not caring enough to check. Gloria's face. Twice. 2 separate visits. 2 separate removals. In the days after her husband had been buried, I watched the footage and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not anger, something quieter. Something close to sadness, actually. Because whatever this woman was, she had also been the mother of the man I loved, and watching this was going to change things in ways that could not be undone. But I sat straight in that chair and I kept my face still, and I reached under the table and I held Marcus's hand, which had gone completely rigid the moment the footage began. He did not speak for a long time after Gerald closed the laptop. Gerald told us that the footage, combined with the safe access logs and the documentation in Raymond's ledger, gave them a strong basis to proceed. That he had already been in contact with a civil litigation specialist. That the estate had options, and that Raymond, careful man that he was, had left things organized in a way that protected Marcus even in a situation like this one. Marcus asked if his mother could go to prison. Gerald said that was a question for the criminal side, which was not his area, but that what had happened had a name, and the name was not a small thing. We drove home mostly in silence. Marcus stared out the window, and I kept my eyes on the road. Somewhere around the 3rd traffic light, he said very quietly, "She looked right at the camera." And I said, "I know." And he said, "She just didn't think anyone would ever check." And I said, "Your father was a careful man." And Marcus put his face in his hands for a moment, just one moment, and then he straightened up and looked forward again. I have never loved him more than I did in that moment. Not because he was strong, because he let himself feel it and then he chose to keep going anyway. That evening, when Gloria called the way she always did around dinner time, Marcus answered. I was in the kitchen and I could hear his side of the conversation. Short sentences. A long silence on his end while she talked. And then he said, "Mom, I need you to know that we've spoken with Dad's lawyer. And I need you to not call here again until we have something formal in place." Another pause. And then, "I'm not asking. I'm telling you." And he ended the call. She showed up at the house 2 days later. I watched through the window as she walked up the front path with that particular walk she had. Confident, certain, the walk of a woman who had never once expected a door to be closed to her. She rang the bell. Then she knocked. Then she rang again. I stood in the hallway and I did not move. After a few minutes, she said through the door, loud enough for me to hear, "Emily, I know you're in there. Open this door. We need to talk like adults." I walked to the door. I opened it just enough to be seen clearly. "Gloria," I said, "you need to go home. When there's something to discuss, it will go through the lawyer's office, not here." She stared at me. She started to say something about family, about loyalty, about how I had never belonged in this family and had always been looking for a way to turn her son against her. I let her finish. And then I said, "The camera was on the whole time. Gerald showed us everything. Whatever you want to say about belonging, that footage is going to say a lot more. Go home, Gloria. I closed the door. I stood with my back against it for a moment, in the quiet of my own house, and I breathed. Just breathed. The way you breathe when something that has been pressing against your chest for a long time finally lifts just enough to let air through. The process that followed was not quick, and it was not easy. There were lawyers and letters and a meeting that Marcus had with his mother where I did not go, but that he came home from looking hollowed out and resolved at the same time. There were family members who took sides and others who went quiet. There was a period of weeks where it felt like the whole shape of our life was being renegotiated, item by item. I kept going to work. I kept coming home. I kept making sure there was food and that the bills were paid and that when Marcus needed to talk, I was there, and when he needed silence, I gave him that too. The civil case was settled. I am not going to put the details here because they are still partially bound by legal terms, and because honestly the amount matters less than the principle, which is that Raymond's wishes were honored, that Marcus received what his father had intended for him, and that the documentation and footage left very little room for anyone to argue otherwise. The criminal side moved more slowly, as it tends to do, and where it ended up is information that belongs to Marcus more than to me, so that part I will leave where it is. What I will tell you is what happened the last time I saw Gloria in person. It was at a cousin's event, months later, one of those family gatherings that happen regardless of whatever drama is moving underneath the surface, because life keeps scheduling itself. She was across the room, and we made eye contact once. Just once. And she looked away first. That's the whole story of that moment. She looked away first. Marcus and I have talked about his father a lot in the time since all of this happened. About who Raymond was. About what he built. About the quietness of his love and the precision of his care. About the fact that he installed that camera not because he suspected his wife specifically, but because he was a man who understood that the things you love need to be protected, and that protection requires action, not just intention. About the letter he left for Marcus, which Marcus read to me one evening on the couch with the lamp on and the rest of the house dark. A letter about work and integrity and what it means to build something that outlasts you. I think about Raymond a lot. I think about the way he said my name without hesitating, the way he listened, the way he quietly, without ever making a speech about it, set things up so that even after he was gone, the truth would have somewhere to stand. That's the kind of care that doesn't make noise, but it shows up when it matters. If you've been in a situation where someone tried to take what was yours, or take what belonged to someone you love, and you know what it feels like to stand in that hallway with a camera you didn't know existed suddenly becoming the only thing between justice and silence, leave me a comment. I want to hear from you, because I know I'm not the only one who has been in a room where someone smiled at me and thought I didn't see what was really happening. We see it. We always see it. We're just quiet until the moment we're not. There is something nobody tells you about the period after something like this gets resolved. Everyone assumes that once the legal part is done, once the papers are signed and the accounts are settled, and the lawyers stop calling, you feel relief. And you do feel something. But it is not the clean, uncomplicated relief you imagined during all those months when everything was still uncertain. It is more complicated than that. It sits in you differently than you expected. Marcus and I had to rebuild something that had been shaken. Not our marriage exactly, because the foundation of that had held, but something around it. The way we moved through family. The way we talked about the future. The way we handled the word home, which had started to carry more weight than it used to. We had conversations in the first months after the settlement that we probably should have had years earlier. About what we wanted, about what we were willing to protect, about the kind of life we were actually building together versus the life we had been assuming we were building without ever saying it out loud. One evening, Marcus told me that the hardest part of all of it, harder than the legal process and harder than the confrontation with his mother, was realizing that the version of his family he had been holding on to in his head was not the real one. That he had spent years managing his image of his mother carefully, filing away the things she did and said that didn't fit, telling himself stories about stress and complexity and the difficulty of her own history, and that the footage had made that impossible. You cannot look at something like that and keep filing it away. It sits in front of you, and it is just what it is. I told him that I thought that was one of the most honest things he had ever said to me, and he said that being honest about it was the only thing that felt like it had any dignity left in it. We kept the house. Marcus inherited it as part of the estate, and for a while we debated whether to sell it, whether it carried too much of the wrong kind of history now, whether starting somewhere new would be cleaner. But in the end we decided to stay, because Raymond had built it and Raymond had been a good man, and the house itself had done nothing wrong. We repainted 2 of the rooms. We moved some furniture. We made it ours in ways it had never quite been before. The study still has the bookshelf on the hinge. Marcus leaves it open now. He says it reminds him of his father's practicality. I think he's right. Gloria eventually moved to be closer to her sister in another state. That happened about 8 months after the settlement. Marcus found out through a cousin and told me without any particular emotion in his voice, just as a fact. I said okay, he said okay, and we moved on with the evening. There is no dramatic ending to their relationship that I could give you, because it did not end dramatically. It just became very small, and then eventually very distant, the way some things do when the energy that was holding them in place finally runs out. I think about what I would say to a younger version of myself, to the Emily who was standing in that hospital hallway hearing those words about never seeing a dime. I would tell her that the anger she felt in that moment was useful, but that she would need to do something more precise with it than just feel it. I would tell her to pay attention to the small things, because the small things are where the truth lives before it becomes obvious. I would tell her that being calm is not the same as being weak, and that the people who mistake your stillness for surrender are always the ones who are most shocked when you finally move. And I would tell her that Raymond saw her. That mattered more than she knew at the time. There is one more thing I want to say before I close this out, and it is this. I have received messages from women who have been in situations that rhyme with mine. Not the same details, but the same feeling. The feeling of being in a room where someone is taking something and counting on you to be too polite or too afraid or too uncertain to say anything about it. What I want those women to know is that the moment you decide to stop being quiet about it is not the moment you lose your composure. It is the moment you find it. The composure that matters is not the one that keeps you silent. It is the one that lets you speak clearly when it counts. Raymond built something that lasted. He protected it carefully, and he left it in good hands. I intend to make sure it stays that way. That is the whole story. And if any part of it sounded familiar, you know where to find me.